Good evening, dear friends. We continue our series of lectures, The City from the Inside. And tonight we are working with a subject that actually has already been touched upon. It was not long ago. We had artists, documentary filmmakers, and theater production directors that share their experience with regard to migration, with regard with their art related to migration. What is migrants' life? It's impossible to understand it without turning to anthropological, sociological research, and that's why we invited great experts tonight, Ekaterina Demintseva, who is a researcher from High School of Economics, and Ute Weinmann, who is a researcher and an activist. So I hope that they will add a diversity of perspectives. And I hope that we'll be able to see many angles of migrants' life, unlike certain cliches that circulate in media sphere. As you know, we have a research component, and we have had interviews with different people, including the migrants, those people that had to overcome this barrier, described as a key thing that makes a citizen migrant, and at least that's what the media describes it like. So I wanted to ask about the essence of migration and the essence of migrant lives. I think that one of the interviews that I would like to discuss, including the early period of socialization. For example, when a small child comes to the city, when this child doesn't know the language yet, and he has to cope with the school environment, and he has to go through initialization rites. So what does it mean for a child to turn from the to turn into an adult, a mature adult with this experience of migration. So let's take a look at the video. At our school, we had 3 or 4 students at one desk. So it means that there were a lot more migrants than it was supposed to be. It was very difficult for me to find friends. I was a reserved person, and the only thing I had to do was to study. Actually, I was an excellent student in my hometown, but when I came here, I had all sorts of marks, C's and D's. And my parents were really surprised. They kept asking me, how come you have such poor marks? You used to be an excellent student. So I wanted to improve my results. I just wanted to find friends. I didn't know anything about rotation. At first, I was talking to those people that accepted me, those people that were like me, and in particular, they were guys from Caucasus because they treated me well. I didn't know the Russian language very well when I came here, so they really helped me to adapt. I remember Karen, who brought me here to Sambo section. And this school is in the underground. And my coach was the student of the founder of of the school, so he was a very talented guy, and he appreciated my efforts. Even though I didn't know the language, he kept telling me nice things, that I would have good future. So I became much more confident. I felt a lot of freedom. But when I had to take exams, when I was a ninth year student, I had to stop training. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a short comment on this video. As you can see, the language barrier cannot be overcome at school. So it's very important to have a family attitude when the children can actually oppose this, because sometimes parents focus on studies too much, so the child has to find his own way, and this shift is very important. You know, this attitude and focus on studying is one of the major factors that we're going to discuss later. My father was bringing me up in such a way that I had to be better. I guess it's just the system of education. For example, our teachers put us in pairs with different people, and we had to help each other. When I moved to the next level, it was a small victory for me, because I realized I could be better than someone else. For example, not long ago, we had a meeting with my peers, and we discussed our progress in Russian and in math. When I came to school or when I came home, I saw many different people doing manual work. You know, for example, my mother didn't work. My father was in housing and utilities business. So my father kept saying that, you know, we came to Russia, you have to study really hard. So I was observing the people that were passing by with nice suitcases, so I had that. I understood that I had to be like them. I just wanted to emphasize that it's very important that our interviewees are so open, because we had very short time for this interview, whereas they managed to give us a lot of facts about their life. Of course, this is a unique biography, but we can see, we can feel a certain collective beat. It means that there is the spirit of competition when the person wants to become better than others. And I guess this is what makes city residents be part of the diverse community that we all belong to. So when these guys begin to make commitments and not necessarily just be like those businessmen wearing suits, he is thinking about some fantastic projects on an everyday level. So how does it happen? What does it mean to be together in everyday life? Let's continue. We played together, and we still play together. For example, I motivate younger students and tell them, if you study well, I'll teach you how to play football better. And I motivate them to play with local kids. So I always invite them to join us to play. At first, these newcomers were suspicious of me, but gradually they got used to me, and we communicated really well. And sometimes when they play, they speak their own native language. But sometimes it's very difficult during the play, so I had to kick them out for a couple of minutes if they spoke their native language. And this was again a kind of motivation to encourage them to learn Russian. So it's really interesting to see how you can remove this barrier, and they no longer had language barrier. Because, after all, they have just to run and go. I think this has been a very good introduction to speak about collective ways of living in the city. So how can we answer the question, does this city belong to us or to me? So I wanted to ask Ekaterina Demintseva how to turn the invisible into something visible. So this is going to be our starting point, because it is a determining factor for the whole series of lecture. I don't see my slides on the screen. Great. First of all, I wanted to show you this picture and ask you a question. Where do you think this picture was taken? It's very difficult to say, right? Because it can be the suburb of Moscow or Berlin or London or Paris, because it shows the district where poor people live. Now I would like to show you a video. Let's see a video about the cities. So this video shows the poorest suburbs of French cities. we can stop here. So why did I want to start with this video? At first I was researching in France. It wasn't in Russia. So in order to study the migrants in the city, you just have to take a bus and go to this kind of neighborhood. You won't make a mistake, because you will definitely see lots of migrant communities. And usually these are neighborhoods of social residents. And in fact, those residential districts were built not for migrants, but for the poorest people, or maybe the workers that came to work at different plants. But when the migrants began to come from the north of Africa and from Maghreb countries, it just turned out that most of local people decided to move from those districts. They didn't want to be associated with color population. So when you go to this kind of neighborhood that looks exactly like Moscow neighborhood, you will see that usually migrant people live there. So when you come to research such districts, it's quite easy to start your research, because you have quite many associations related to migrant children or women migrants that organize different celebrations or provide medical support. So there are always people that you can focus upon in the course of your research. One of the major problems related to these areas is social homogeneity, and this means that when people find themselves in a common environment among the people that are just like them, and the school cannot be a lift for the people that live in such environment, because it's not a French-speaking community, and so as a result they can't integrate into a French-speaking society or German-speaking society. And it means that children become isolated and they develop their own identity. So they identify themselves as a Sudanese or some other person. And this is a characteristic that means I'm opposed to the society, because the society does not want to accept me. And this is the map. It's called Cité Sensible, which can be translated as problematic neighborhoods, and they are concentrated around big industrial centers, or for example around Marseille, Lyon, Lille, in the south of France. So they are migrants areas where you can come and see what happens there. People often say, there are gentrification processes, so why does it happen there? And it doesn't happen there because those districts are very far from the metro. They are in the outskirts, and they are really isolated neighborhoods where you can't really sell the apartment, and that's why it's very homogeneous and very poor. Now, the second type of migrants settlement in European cities shows that migrants have been driven away from Paris and New York through gentrification, and I mean former workers' neighborhoods that are located in the old districts. So migrants used to settle down there because the accommodation was very cheap. This photo was taken next to Barbesa metro station, and that's a famous area for migrant settlement. And this is so-called Chinatown in Paris, where the apartment buildings were constructed, and Chinese people began to occupy them. That's why it got the name Chinatown. Social housing, which is being built in Paris, you can see it is marked in black, so the concentration of social residence buildings. And in the 60s, they were workers' areas, but later the migrants began to settle down there. And if you can rent an apartment, or if you can sell the apartment, the more expensive the apartments get, the faster gentrification process goes. It's quite easy to find migrants in European cities because you know where they live and you understand where you should go. And apart from them, there are different associations that exist in these places. Migrants try to integrate into urban environments, so they try to create not just shops and restaurants, but they try to set up certain establishments for supporting themselves and other migrants just like them. In the early 2000s, I found this map, and the researcher used the same methods like those used by European researchers. So she showed where migrants were registered in Moscow. Actually, I have the map for Tatar people registration. I would be critical of such approach because I have had 5-year research experience, and it's clear that migrants do not live where they are registered. So it doesn't really make sense to mark the registration points, migrants' registration points. I guess this methodology doesn't really work if we speak about Moscow. I have found this mass media version recently. I think it was published in Moscow News newspaper. So again, this was an attempt to show the places of migrants' concentration, and we can see where migrants live. So the top 5 migrants areas show Tverskoy district, and this is 2013, and at that time it was easy to buy and sell different documents. So Tverskoy district was most popular in terms of selling migration documents. So we can't really work with these figures because when migrants bought registration, they didn't really care about the district location. So can we use the same instruments to measure migration here in Russia? This picture isn't much different from Paris suburbs, but my main point is Moscow is very different from European cities. If we look at Moscow, it seems like it's very similar, but it turns out that very different people live in these apartment buildings because both rich and poor people, both doctors and migrants live here because Moscow is very mixed city. We have Soviet history of accommodation distribution. So we have seen that, for example, businessmen with Mercedes could live in the same apartment as 20 migrants. So we can't measure the same, we can't use the same tools to measure this. Maybe there are some districts where you can find more migrants than in some others. But anyway, these apartment buildings are very diverse. So it's impossible to use the tool of migrants registration to study the situation. So you have to use some anthropological methods to understand how migrants live in the city. Thank you, Ekaterina. You explained two stereotypes related to mass media stereotype and another one implying that Moscow consists of different enclave areas. It's very important to talk about this because the invisible can be grouped and concentrated under the surface of the city. It shows that the invisible can be diffused in the city, and it's very important to capture all these trends. So now I would like to give the floor to Ute Weinmann, and we can continue our conversation about the invisible and how it can be captured. Well, my approach to this issue comes from a different perspective. I did a research related to violence, and I can tell you that Moscow is very different from European cities. And the same is true about where migrants can be attacked. For example, Sova Center is trying to register all sorts of attacks that can happen in Moscow. It's a very difficult job because people that attacked migrants were proud of that and boasted about this, but now Nazi people are afraid of saying this openly because some have been put to prison. So our non-governmental organization supports migrants in Moscow, and we give support to those people that suffered from hate crimes. So as a result of our work, we have developed this map. You can find it on the website hatecrime.ru, and you can see that the attacks happen all over the city, both in the center and in the outskirts. Well, you can see higher concentration in the center, a little bit less in the southwestern area of Moscow. In the mid 2000s, we discussed the safety issues with the mayor's office, migrants safety and security. So mayor's office established a patrolling service that were monitored, that did monitoring of the areas in the southwestern area, not far from Lumumba University, because there are many foreign students who study at this university. So anyway, you can find more details about this on our website, and 116 people were killed in 2008, according to SOVA Center data. But this is probably not a precise figure. After military operations started in Donbass, the number of crimes reduced, probably because those people that attacked migrants went to the front, so they take part in the war in Donbass. After some events in Birylova in 2013, it was decided not to publish the information about attacks, whereas before this data you could find a lot of information about attacks, the nationality of victims. Many newspapers and magazines were writing about it. And we sometimes checked this just to make a clear picture, to understand whether the information given in those articles was right. And we realized that it was not always true, and some attacks had never been covered by press. So it's not just my personal opinion, but that police does not really want to mention this information. And in January this year, many newspapers and magazines in Moscow received videos from nationalists, and they seem to be very hurt because, it looked like they no longer attacked anyone. So they sent new videos where you can see how cruel they beaten up people that didn't have Slavonic looks. Maybe this was a provocation. Novaya Gazeta considered this as a provocation, but anyway, mass media didn't want to write about it. They didn't want to disseminate this information. Maybe people are not sensitive to these issues, but anyway, newspapers and magazines do not write about it. I just wanted to tell you where these attacks can happen, and it can happen anywhere. For example, this is Novoslobodskaya metro station. Yuri Vaishenko is the photographer who took this picture. He was involved in creating that map and following Reach Out organization in Germany that has been supporting victims of violence for a long time. So he took these pictures. This man was from Cameroon, and he was attacked at Novoslobodskaya metro station, but he called us and we could respond very fast. We sent an interpreter and we caught two Nazis. This is Alexander Lee. He suffered much more, and he was attacked at a bus stop. You might want to know whether this is a big threat for people that have education, that have money. But in fact, it's an ordinary situation. People get attacked everywhere. And this is Chisteye Prudy. You have probably recognized this place. It's in the center of the city. And, it seems very clean. Many people go there for a walk. And it happened in 2009 before the Russian march. So this kind of march doesn't happen there anymore, but nationalists and Nazis used to get together there, so they attacked people very often in this place. For example, it could happen in 10 seconds. Once they see migrants, they beat them up and run away. So it was really difficult to understand how this could happen so fast, but that's the way they do it. For example, you could stand there, and not necessarily that it was obvious that you came from Asian country. So local residents did their best to prevent this from happening. But anyway, I just wanted to say that you can be attacked anywhere in Moscow. Thank you, Ute. I guess we can see some overlap between the spaces. On the one hand, we have social stratification of Moscow's population, and Ekaterina has mentioned the concentration of migrant people, which is not so obvious if we focus only on the official data. Besides that, we have had this pilot research that helps us to see violence in Moscow. So it shows that the city turns out not just to reveal the violence, but also it means that the city can be used tactically for violence. So migration is making its way to mass media, and there generate so many implications. So what kind of associations do we have? Do we associate it with migrant workers that fix the road? So thanks to the criticism, thanks to activist research, we come closer to real understanding as to how migrants' lifestyle is organized, and what relations migrants have with medical institutions and school institutions. The main question whether the city belongs to everyone or just to some individual groups. And now I would like to give the floor to Ekaterina so that we could continue our journey across the visible and the invisible. So this map was created by us. It is based on the research carried out in 2013. We carried out our research in 4 districts, and it was very difficult to understand where we had to go to find migrants. So we decided just to go and study 4 different districts based on different social characteristics. So now we have more districts that have been included in our scope of research. So speaking about the findings of our research, migrants don't settle down as communities. They settle down in different areas, different districts of the city, even if they come from the same town in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan. it's quite easy to find accommodation for migrant workers because they are not looking for apartments, they are looking just for beds. So different internet communities can help with finding their beds. Migrants use cheap infrastructure, but they can go anywhere they want on weekends. For example, this shows some journeys where migrants that the migrants use. They go to shopping malls, they go to mosques. For example, men from Asia go to mosque on weekends. They also go to department stores to buy clothes or food. So, unlike European cities, we can see that people go everywhere. Speaking about infrastructure, so here you can see 2012, and you can see two schools. This is Moscow region. I don't want to say what's this town is called. It's not far from Moscow Circular Road, about 10 or 15 kilometers. So we can recognize the migrant school. No, this is not easy because these schools look like any Soviet school. So we did our research in this town, and one of these schools is called a black school. Why is it called a black school? Because migrant children study there. When I asked how many migrant children study there, about 6 to 7 people, not more than 10 people on average. And the classes usually consist of 30 students. So I can tell you that this is a migrant school on the right, whereas just if you take a 3-minute walk away from this school, you'll find this other school, and we actually mixed them, and people were very surprised when they realized we came to their own school. So how does this myth about migrant school created? The directors and school administrators said that, the school showed poor indicators, poor results, in particular final school results. So most of the children that were interested in high quality education for their children decided to send their children to a different school. And that school didn't want to take any migrants' children. So as a result, all the migrants' children were sent to that other school. And the school administrators used to say, migrants' children are not a problem for us because they can speak Russian language. Actually, alcoholics' children make a much bigger problem for us. And despite that, this school is called a migrant school. Now the next map. You can see it clearly. I have found the top 100 schools of the Moscow region. I think I took this information from the regional authorities website. So you can see that these top 100 schools are located everywhere. So this means that good schools, prestigious schools, can be located within 50 meters from a bad migrant school. So this makes local situation very different from European or American situation. For example, in America or in Europe, the school is closely related to the district. Like I said at the beginning, the child in a migrant district can go only to the school where other migrants' children go. And in Russia, we can see that children can live anywhere, but the migrants' children would be sent to a worse school. So this segregation is not based on district. For example, not far from the center, there is a migrant school not far from Baumanskaya metro station. So migrant school is a school with poor indicators. Exam results. So here you can see a school in Paris suburbs. So it's quite, it has a homogeneous structure, and mainly there are migrants' children. And this school provide special programs. For example, they have a football club program. I like telling my students the story explaining why there are so many migrant players in French football clubs, for example, volleyball teams. It's just because many children spend a lot of time playing football or playing other games outdoors. There were some programs to support socially deprived classes, mainly migrants' children. So these social services enrolled and recruited migrant children that spent too much time outside. So, just as a result of social program support, these children were brought to different sport clubs, and some of them reached a very good results. And another factor is territorial exclusion. Children are quite isolated. I mean, children that live in European countries. It's quite different from Moscow. So you can see these students and this picture that I took in one of Moscow schools. You can see that the school has very different children. And the school administrators said that the children that don't speak Russian keep silent for the first year. And then the next year they want to be like others. And during the third year, they actually want to be better than others. So we have so many excellent students among migrants' children because they want to be ahead of others. They want to achieve something, and they have much better motivation just because their parents tell them, you know, you should work hard, you should study hard. And I have observed that it was very true. migrants' children motivation was much better. So I showed you a migrant school in Paris district. You saw children wearing hoodies, and the school is quite liberal. Children can put on any kind of clothes. They have different styles. Whereas we visited several Moscow region schools, and those schools all had cadet classes. So there's a new thing that has been introduced to Moscow schools, and all the children wear uniform. Either they have to wear white tops and black bottom, or they wear cadet uniform. That's a new thing which has been introduced to Moscow schools. And actually, this is enforced on the children, and I have even seen children wearing badges in schools. So when anybody enters the classroom, for example, myself as a researcher, I was very surprised to see that everybody stood up. So they have very strict discipline. It was a military order, and it was very unusual for me to see this military order at schools. Thank you, Ekaterina, for impressive anthropological mosaic. I think it was really important to see this relationship between individual experience shared by our interviewee and this collective experience that you shared with us. So it's interesting to see the ways institutional discrimination has. Sometimes school seems to be an institution for integration that is just trying to integrate children from different kind of families, whereas we can see that school can also use a mechanism of discrimination, and it could be either about segregation, certain hierarchy in educational space, when schools are turned into not ethnically marked schools, but class marked schools. So the issue of race is not a decisive factor. It's about class differences, about economic resources that different families have. So actually, we won't be surprised if migrant children would belong to a higher class 10 years later. And another point is the invisibility of successful people. And I want to get back to mass media. The idea about migrants' lifestyle is related to visible facts like attacks or violence that demonstrate migrants as a figure which is very different from the local people living in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, migrants' children that are successful at school can graduate the university with flying colors can be excellent students. So this can create a problem for understanding this phenomenon. For example, in France, there were studies of migrant families related to terrorist attacks. So, terrorists are considered to be usually newcomers, those people that just arrived from Islamic countries. So, now I would like to give the floor to Ute Weinmann again. So, while studying at school, people can have different status. Sometimes schools don't accept children without registration. For example, if you have just registration for 1 year, you won't be accepted to school. And sometimes it's really difficult to get this registration for 1 year. And parents might often don't have such registrations, and it means that the schools won't accept their children, and it means that their children can't go to school. We have a representative of civil support organization that receives lots of requests, lots of appeals. Sometimes they can help, and the school will take a child, and sometimes the school accepts the older child, but won't accept the younger child. It's true that children have to go to school to be integrated in society and to study. Sometimes children come to Russia and they don't know the Russian language. In this case, state schools don't really provide some extra support for these children. They don't teach children the Russian language. But there are some projects implemented by public organizations that can help migrant children to study Russian. There is a committee for civil support, and for example, at some point the schools refused to accept Chechen children, but there was a legal proceeding related to that. So then the schools began to take such children. But there are different projects implemented by public organizations. For example, this is a Jewish center, and the Jewish center has a school for small children. They can be first year or 2 year students. So it's very important for them to give these children an opportunity to study at a regular school. So they receive information from the local schools, because in fact the teachers themselves ask this center to help their students to learn the Russian language. So there are quite many organizations that work with children that don't go to school. But for this center, it's very important to make sure children go to school and have access to public education. So the legal status is important here. I am now moving on to another important subject, which is essential for migrants. But in fact, it's relevant not only for migrant people, but also for local citizens that can encounter different kind of limitations. For example, speaking about salaries that are not paid regularly. It's true, migrants are more vulnerable group of population because they don't have citizenship. So employers don't pay salaries, and this is a big problem. That's a form of discrimination. It's quite a tough form of discrimination because you can't really work without your salary. You can't pay for your accommodation. You can't send money to your relatives. And even if you have a status, but you don't have a citizenship, it makes you much more vulnerable. So people can do whatever they want. For example, one person that was working for a housing service, he didn't get salary, and he sent a complaint to investigation committee. But instead of dealing with this complaint, they accused this person with illegal stay in this country. If that person had some problems with documents, he wouldn't have sent that complaint. So it's quite risky for migrants to make appeals or to complain because, they can be deported. And speaking about violence, we understand that this is a significant factor. When the person is attacked and this person doesn't have citizenship, he or she won't go to police because the police would start asking you different kind of questions, and it won't make you happy. So, Moscow police likes deporting migrants. I don't know if they still do it, but in the past, police used to organize regular patrol. For example, they could stop a person that went out to buy some Coca-Cola, and this person didn't have the documents with him. So there were so many cases when the police sent migrants back home, and some of those people had their migration card and other documents. But anyway, this was something common. I don't know if you have observed this, but I saw it many times near my building. I see policemen standing there every day, checking documents, and mainly they check documents of Asian-looking people. So that's everyday practices, and it probably happens not only in Moscow. I don't know if you like football. I hate football. Now we have Confederations Cup in several cities here in Russia. So foreign workers when they come to Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, or Sochi, they have to get their registration within 1 day. Russian citizens have to get their registration within 3 days. And next year, we are going to have the same problem because we are going to have a football championship. Thank you very much for making this analysis. I wanted to make a brief response to this. I think it's important that when the institutional analysis is made, people say that, we don't have migration supporting policies. It's so imperfect that there are too many violations. So the analysis that you have shared confirms this point of view. Another thing is certain civil policies at the bottom level, and you have described the integration of migrants' children at schools when the teachers do not necessarily focus on ethnic identity, but on children's motivation to study. So migration policies are available only on the bottom level as part as different initiatives. So we understand that school is not only a machine for integration or segregation. It's also can help the city to become more to become a better place for migrants. I would like now to tell you about entertainment time, leisure time that migrants have. So we have carried out different kinds of research. Beginning with 2013, we focused on migrants from Asia, and when we come to schools, we study migrants from Moldova and Ukraine, from Caucasus. So I see migrants from completely different countries. I can't say that they have different activities that they like during their free time, if we compare them with other local citizens. I have looked through the pictures that I have, and I realized they just have empty corridors or empty classrooms, because when you talk to children or to people that trust you, it's I don't feel comfortable to take pictures, so most of the pictures that I show here are not mine. So what do migrants do in their free time? For example, they play football. Sometimes they go to some abandoned site and play football. Sometimes they play together with other locals. So in 2015, we discovered several playgrounds like this, and we mentioned that these were the sites created by migrants, but the locals began to complain about this. So the police began to go there and throw everyone out. Or, for example, they would put some kind of equipment to that place. It means that local people contact the police and the police is trying to use some violent methods to fix the situation. When we conducted our research, we realized that there is this stereotype implying that all the migrants go to the market. Especially mass media portrays this picture that the migrants go to their special markets. But when we carried out our research and asked our migrants where they went, many of them said that they went to Afi Mall and many other shopping malls. So we made this conclusion. When migrants come to Moscow, many of them say that they got disappointed with Moscow because they live in the suburbs. They have to share the apartment with many other people. So, sometimes when we go to Paris or New York, we also get disappointed after we leave the airport. So many people say, I was going to Moscow. Moscow used to be the capital city during Soviet time, but I came to Perovo. I share my apartment with 5 other people. I see the same ugly buildings around me. Why did I have to leave my hometown? So many people share the same stories. They find themselves in an alien environment with lots of discrimination, so they don't feel well. And the shopping mall environment is a safe environment. So they, girls and boys can walk there. There are so many benches in those shopping malls. And shopping malls look like the ideal life that you can see on TV. So many people can talk to each other. When you go out, you can spend some time in a food court. You can just have some tea and talk to your peers, and you can forget your overpopulated apartment. Then you can take some pictures and send to your mother or to your relatives so that they could see that you live in a very nice place. So it's true that many people go for a walk to a shopping mall. They go out to the shopping mall. And when I said, there are very many migrants in Afi Mall, and many people don't notice migrants just because most people prefer to go to restaurants or to a movie theater, and we just fail to notice migrant people that can sit on a bench or cheaper shops, for example, fixed price shops where you can buy jeans for 400 or Dior perfume for 300. There are also the shops, смешные цены, funny prices, again, cheap shops. So do migrants need their own places? At first, they didn't really have their own infrastructure because they can go to the same places, to the same shops and department stores or shopping malls. But when people feel discrimination, when they realize they can't enter the common space, they try to set up their own places. For example, now Kyrgyz people try to set up their Kyrgyz hospitals, and they're set up by Kyrgyz doctors. The first clinic like that was created with the support from Kyrgyz embassy, and it's not because they have different healthcare system or different medical treatment. It's just because the migrants prefer to go there because they feel welcome there. And actually, the prices are not low. They're the same as in other hospitals, but you probably can get some discounts. Well, sometimes, for example, you can get discounts if you are going to visit it several times, but other Moscow clinics also offer some system of discounts. Anyway, price is not the most decisive factor. So anyway, migrants can expect that they can afford the treatment there, or the medicines that the doctor will prescribe him would be affordable for the migrant. And nobody would check their documents there. And apart from that, the doctors know the family history very well. For example, sometimes women can have some intimate diseases, so they realize they have to tell their husbands everything. So cultural differences are taken into account there. Also, there are Kyrgyz discotheques and Kyrgyz restaurants. So there are also shared public spaces like the Red Square or VDNH, the exhibition of national economy. So here you see a picture from KFC, and I found it on the internet. It was a report made by some guy, and so he says, that's what I have seen. And basically this photo shows that there are guys from Asian countries that come to KFC and talk. Actually, many migrants visit KFC because it's not expensive, and these cafes are located in the center. They're cheap, and they are near metro stations. Here you can see the wedding party on the Red Square, and again I took it from one photographer's website, and this photographer basically says that I can photograph any kind of wedding parties, including migrants' wedding parties. And the picture on the right shows the kindergarten set up by migrants, because it's very difficult to send small migrant children to kindergartens. So again, this is an example of infrastructure that is being created by migrants because they can't use the public infrastructure. Thank you very much. Again, it was very interesting to get to know this lifestyle. So we understand that their lifestyle is not related to political position. It's more about consumption. So all those initial labels are dissolved into this. It's like a melting pot if we speak about the shopping mall. But it becomes less friendly if we look at it from a consumption point of view, which is stratified depending on the income or family capital. So I want now Ute to continue her analysis. I'll try to be brief. I wanted to show you another picture. Since Katya mentioned Afimol, this picture was taken in Afimol. I took this picture, and it's true that many migrants spend their free time there, and also many of them work there. But it's true, the atmosphere is very relaxed there. But also there are less fashionable places. Maybe you could recognize this building. That's Moscow State University, and this garage district called Shanghai is located nearby. Actually, it was set for demolition, but it hasn't yet been demolished. I should go and visit it this year. I haven't done it yet. In summer, there are about 100 migrant people. So they all live there. Of course, these are people that don't get big salaries. Anyway, it's possible to live there in summer because it has all the necessary infrastructure, but it's impossible to live there in winter. So there are garages, there are car service points, also some cafes, and Katya knows one of these cafes. So it's a tiny cafe, but it's very nice. And many people go there to have lunch. It's very inexpensive, so you can't find many places like this, and they are not found easily. So the city mayor is trying to get rid of such places, and I'm very sorry about this. Speaking about leisure, and getting back to violence, it can happen during some leisure activities. Some of my colleagues, and when I was working for the Committee for Civil Initiatives, I went to Lublino, and I asked if they knew about activities that were going to happen. So I met a guy from Armenia. So he said he knew what violence was. And he said that yes, they were attacked, and he said that they could come 5 or 6 people. But they were taking turns, and they were keeping an eye because they realized that something could happen. So maybe the degree of tension has reduced and the situation isn't as dangerous as it used to be. But anyway, they cooperated. And some people were standing in the metro passes that distributed their contact phone numbers just in case anything happens, like attack or some other thing. So it means that they created their own system of security, and I find it very interesting. So it means that they didn't feel any limitations because they wanted to use whatever they could. But I guess non-migrants also have their tactics as to improve their safety. Because, for example, now during Confederation Cup, you can't carry any weapons, including gas balloon. Well, I'm afraid we are running out of time, and even though Garage is very hospitable, we haven't touched upon certain issues. But I guess we will be able to continue our discussion informally after we finish this discussion. I guess we made it clear that we can't just have one picture, and we can't stick to cliché and straightforward oppositions demonstrated in mass media. Anyway, of course, there is a lot of violence, but there are civil initiatives, this mutual introduction and meeting that bring people closer. So class and not race becomes more important here. So Moscow becomes a space of achievement, a space of risk and career. So Moscow is just as complicated in the eyes of migrants, just as our eyes. So thank you very much, Ekaterina. Thank you, Ute, and we can continue our discussion informally.